and welcome to Leadership PRN. This is the Dalhousie Faculty of Medicine's podcast for leaders, both emerging and established. My name is Dr. Lara Hazelton, and I'm a Director of Faculty Development with the Faculty of Medicine. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me Dr. André Bernard. Hi, André.
Hi, Lara. It's my delight to be here today. Thank you for having me on.
I've wanted to have you on the podcast for a while because I know you've had a lot of really interesting roles in leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about your leadership work and also how you came to be interested in leadership?
Absolutely. And I'll say that I'm really touched to be invited here. I sometimes think of myself as an accidental leader. I don't know how I made it into this space, but I'm originally from Cape Breton and I grew up in Badek and then Mabu. And as I reflect back into my early childhood, in small communities, I was forced to be a small community leader. I repaired computers as an adolescent, and I was involved locally with community organizations. And then, fast forward to my time here at Dalhousie, which began in 2002 when I started medical school. I really see that 4 years as really what cultivated what I would articulate as my leadership arc, which has been extensively being involved in organized medicine in all facets throughout my time. I guess in medical school, I came here having worked for the federal government prior to med school. So I kind of came with I thought at the time, a different view onto what medicine was like. I came here wanting to be a public health physician. That was my clinical goal, if you will. And as I entered med school, I realized there were so many possibilities for that. So it was trying to bridge an interest in public health and the leadership perspective that one gleans from that work. I had been doing, for example, tuberculosis control work in the Philippines, to this new med school thing. And I was like, I need to find a place where I can share my voice and perspective. And that landed on my third week of medical school, I think, as in being involved with the Canadian Federation of Medical Students, the national body that represents all medical students in Canada. And that's really where it started. I joined the executive of the CFMS in 2002 and have remained really completely committed to organizations that support medical students, then residents, and then physicians all the way through. And you'll know now in my current role, I'm entering my 8th year as board chair for Doctors Nova Scotia, an organization that I have felt has been the pinnacle of effectiveness in my leadership work, at least for my leadership style. And I'll speak more about that in a little bit. But throughout residency, I was involved with the National Residents Body, which at the time was called CARE. After that, I was also involved with the Canadian Medical Association on its board and some of its various committees involved in governance reform within that organization. And then in my early career, I finished residency in 2012 and almost immediately became the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association's representative to the World Medical Association, the body that represents national physicians associations around the world. So, you can get the theme there. The theme there is physician advocacy through groups that represent physicians, med students, and residents, rather than leadership manifest within decision-making bodies. Now I'm associate head of the Department of Anesthesia, and my pleasure to be part of the Faculty of Medicine here at Dalhousie. And so when I gather it all together, I think about my leadership story as been one about influencing change through both outside and within. You ask me to be on your podcast at an interesting time because I'm trying to discern what is next in my leadership arc as I move forward. So that's a little bit about my background. And, as for me, I'm an anesthesiologist. I love clinical medicine. So part of this leadership cadence for me is how do you be a leader and be a clinician at the same time? And within the health system, that is actually very, very challenging to do. And I'm maybe stubborn. I won't stop trying to do it. I feel like sometimes I haven't found the correct part of it, and part of that is looking at how institutions support physician leadership as maybe one of the questions I want to continue to explore as well.
So you said that you feel there's sort of an insider-outsider experience between the advocacy type organization work. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. And certainly, if I look across from my time with the CFMS through till Doctors Nova Scotia, what I've learned is that sometimes, and I think your listeners will appreciate, when you're in a complex health system, there's a sense of powerlessness. Sometimes you feel physicians have massive power to influence change within systems. And yet, when we go to work every day and we see all the problems and the demand and the burdens that affect people, our patients, our families. It feels like a large responsibility. How do we get the system to perform better? And what I've learned along the way is that sometimes the best place to find positive influence is being with an external organization that can offer perhaps a mirror up to, reflecting what some of the messages that may affect change within the health system, be it Nova Scotia Health, IWK, Dalhousie University. My time with Doctors Nova Scotia has been about gathering physicians, and I'll say my approach and my leadership perspective is really about shared leadership through collaboration with other physician leaders. Shared leadership to me is really what it's all about. It's not about being, I have a role. I'm board chair of Doctors Nova Scotia. That comes with a set of tasks that I do. But the shared leadership for me is being part of a collective voice on behalf of physicians within that organization that others are willing to hear the messages from. And I'll say we've seen some amazing collaborative work from government, from the health authorities in the last, since I've joined Doctors Nova Scotia, that, what I've realized is we're all on the same page. We're all working for the betterment of healthcare, of our learners, of research, education. We're all in this together. So how do we find and broker a common language and a common understanding? And like I say, being on the outside looking in as Doctors Nova Scotia, I mean, it's a bit of a false dichotomy because I'm also within the system as well. But having the perspective of being within an outside organization that has a different set of tools to communicate a message is really, really important. I'll take, DNS, Doctors Nova Scotia, as we abbreviate, has a very clear government relations strategy. And what we know is we can be more effective at influencing positive change that affect the lives of our patients in a positive way by being collaborative with others. We are not inside the tent, to use my dear friend Nancy McCready-Williams' expression, and we don't like to be outside of the tent. Sometimes our peers want us to be on the outside of the tent, slamming our fists on tables, making noise. But what we know and what I've come to know is we are most effective in transformative change in leadership when we are all at the table together as peers, without hierarchies. And that external agency that you have by being on the outside, sometimes you can set the table differently when you're on the outside from when you're within a very hierarchical leadership role within a health system.
I was thinking that about Doctors Nova Scotia probably isn't very hierarchical. Would that be fair to say?
And that's completely, the board of directors within, and that's another one of my passions, as I think we've spoken of before, is good governance. What are the rules for which organizations work together effectively? That's part of what my leadership sort of message to others is. And I feel passionately we have to have a common understanding of how we do our work together, and I call that governance. And you can, is it Robert's rules? Probably not, but it's some way of an agreement of how we work together. So going back to your question, Doctors Nova Scotia is non-hierarchical because it's really there to represent the voices and perspectives of the entire membership of physicians, both practicing and resident trainees and medical students even, in crafting what is improving healthcare for Nova Scotians and improving all aspects of what we consider to be academic medicine, research, and education as well. And what it looks like is having really bold conversations as a team of people, board members from across this province, an amazing staff team. There's another sort of, if I might just sidebar for a moment and say that we often use the term physician leadership as a special category of leadership. And, I'll just be bold and say it's not. It's just leadership. And when we take away sort of our perspective of power or authority of which we don't take for granted, physicians have that. But the staff team at Doctors Nova Scotia are incredible leaders that we dock up to, and they make us better. So the non-hierarchical leadership model that I sort of espouse in shared leadership means everyone sits at the table as a peer and everyone's voice is heard. And one of the voices that we need to hear more and more, of course, are our patients' voices, which we can bring the stories. Our governance structures may not necessarily specifically include patients within, and I'm happy to see Dalhousie, Nova Scotia Health, and in other areas. But we also need to remember that we're not just there for the interests of our peers and our members, but absolutely it is number one focus, which is enabling our physicians in Doctors Nova Scotia to thrive by having a positive impact on their patients' lives. And that's what the focus is patients.
So when you talk about governance, could I paraphrase it as rules of engagement? Do you think that's kind of what governance is?
Roles of internal engagement, how you get along as a body. And I think at its most basic form for me, governance is about how do you run an organization or a deliberative body in a way that is fair, transparent, and accountable to the constituency that you're representing. We often take for granted that the organizations just work that way, but it takes intentionality. And I think there's been a lot of scholarship from the business world about how you can create integrity of organizations and accountability in that work by having good internal processes and rules. And those aren't meant to be encumbering and to slow you down. Because some people say, it's funny, when we do governance education sessions I do it with different boards of directors, you get this gasp when you walk into the room. It's like, we have to talk about governance. But it's really is, what are the rules, implicit and explicit, of the playground? Remember being a kid and you knew you couldn't go beyond the fence, and you knew, what age you could go on what piece of equipment and why, and it all made sense to you. It's making explicit those things and then transmitting that accountability, that understanding of how you work to the counterparts, the stakeholders with which you relate, whether it be your members in Doctors Nova Scotia or the stakeholders of your partnership. So that if you're, say, a leader from Nova Scotia Health coming to Doctors Nova Scotia for an opinion, you can understand the perspective and how the thoughtful policy was developed and comes to that point in time. It's not just André, board of director chair, sitting down at a typewriter, if you will, writing a policy position on something. It actually went through multiple levels of engagement with the membership and then comes to a board of directors that knows how to give thoughtful consideration and hear voices that may not be at the table and then make a decision on whether they agree to that perspective or not. And there's been very exciting work in that space by DNS in the last little while, including in harm reduction, which is something that oftentimes physicians have been quite silent on. So I'm proud of that work.
In your role now with your department, you said you're the associate head for your department. Is that right? How is governance different in that setting?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I'll say that the Department of Anesthesia is a large department. We have over 100 people representing variable full-time equivalent status. There's a lot of part-time people. But that's a large department to try and cultivate a common vision and understanding with. So for governance within an academic department of Dalhousie University and with the health authorities, it's an interesting question because what's the purpose? Don't you just go to work and put people to sleep and treat pain and all those? No, we have an obligation to cultivate a vision for how we improve as a department. And governance for us means we have thoughtful leaders that sit together and dream about what that might look like in the future. I look to Dr. Dean Anderson and the new Faculty of Medicine strategic plan, and the fact that our department did its own internal, thoughtful, deliberative strategic plan to say, how do we be a better department 5 years from now? And how it completely resonates with that which both the health authorities have done and what the Faculty of Medicine has done. It means internally as physicians who are stalwartly independent, as we know, that the people representing them at making decisions, for one, it's a participatory decision-making process as a department of peers, but there is a governing body. In our department, we call it cabinet, which is an odd terminology for it, which I also chair as associate head. Where we make those decisions of how do we advance ourselves. But I'll say, in my leadership role within the department, it's also interesting that we have an associate head. The old model of leadership would see there's one person, and again, it speaks to what we were talking about before, is how do we recognize that everyone brings leadership gifts, no matter if they're in a formal role or not. So how do we create a constellation of leadership roles within an academic anesthesia department that allows all voices to be heard? That's what shared leadership is in our department. And the Department of Anesthesia is Janice Chisholm, who's a friend, and she wisely chose to empower others. So we have an amazing clinical and academic team to work together on matters that affect the Department of Anesthesia. And why it matters now is we have to play well with others. We have a surgical backlog problem across this country and arguably beyond. And we need to find ways of creating access to care for Nova Scotians and our families, because that's who they are. It's my dad who just had his colorectal surgery a few months ago in Antigonish. We need to be finding ways for people to access timely care. And that means we need to do it even as an anesthesia department, be an active player collaborating with other departments, the health authorities, and getting that reshaping of healthcare toward improving access and flow.
How can physicians become more effective at working within complex systems?
I probably lose sleep over that question, to be honest, Lara. As the urgency, linking back to what I spoke about before, becomes more clear for all of us to make a positive impact, I think it's really challenging. I think one way of doing it is education. I think we've seen great work in Prince Edward Island. They have they've had a master's program for physician leaders in that province. Similar in Nova Scotia, the PLDP, which I think you're well aware of, I know, is a leadership program that's now had many, many different cohorts through, that has been about teaching what are physician leadership skills, or leadership skills, to go back to what I said before. Because, here's the thing. If you think about the natural history of a physician, we start in undergrad, probably in science, but maybe not because there's variability, but the average person comes through science. They do medical school, where I'm very grateful to see increasing leadership support and acknowledgement for medical students and residents along the way. But leadership is not a core curriculum piece. And if it is, it's isolated from the complexity of the health system that we're a part of. So I think really being intentional, especially with early and mid and even senior career physicians, to say, how do you make a positive influence in leadership using your roles? We have to teach people the skills on how to do that. I think I shouldn't say teach. People know what the skills are, but there's invisible barriers to being effective that we need to help physicians understand. And the Physician Leadership Institute courses would be another source of, I think, of resources for learning those skills, and national bodies that help support physician leadership, like the Canadian Medical Association and the Canadian Society of Physician Leadership. And what I would say is, we haven't achieved what we need to achieve unless every person, whether they see themselves as a formal leader or not, understands that they have opportunity to develop in the leadership space.
And when you think about your own experience, what advice would you give that medical student coming from Cape Breton who has an interest in leadership and wants to make a contribution, whether it's from within the system or from without? What advice would you give to that person?
Yeah. A medical student from Dalhousie Medical School asked me that very question in the last couple of weeks. And because there's only so many formal spots within various organizations, and I say, just step up, keep stepping up, find unlikely places where you may make a positive contribution. And again, going back to my model is shared leadership through organizations. There's many other models of asserting leadership. Some of the innovative individual action that medical students and residents are doing to make positive change is really, really heartening. You may know there is a pain and addictions inpatient consult service that essentially got established through a collaboration of interested people. Residents, including residents in the Department of Anesthesia, were instrumental in doing that. Like, that is positive leadership that makes a immeasurable impact on the lives of patients. Through what really is an individual social action approach rather than an organizational governance approach. But there are I think finding mentorship is the other way of doing it, and which is to say that when this medical student, who I hope is listening, reaches out to me again, I think connecting with them on a regular basis and ask the question, how can I support your individual leadership, both formally and informally? I think that's one of the obligations we as established physician leaders can leave with our medical learners, particularly medical students.
Thanks so much for coming to speak with us today, Andre. I really appreciate a chance to hear your thoughts about this. You've had quite an interesting trip through various roles, and I'm curious as well to see what you end up doing next.
I really appreciate being here. Thanks so much.
And that's the end of this episode of Leadership PRN. If you have particular topics you'd like to hear covered or someone you think I should speak to, please feel free to reach out to me at lara.hazelton@dal.ca or lara.hazelton@nshealth.ca. Until next time, take care.